Is an era that began with the collapse of a superpower and it ended with a virus that would touch every corner of the planet. Welcome to Geopolitics with Tyberius D, where we're talking about globalism. Goofed up that intro just a little bit. Almost had it, but should have practiced it a little more. Anyway, good morning, everyone. It is, of course, your guy here. We're doing Geopolitics in the morning, which is a little bit of a weird thing for us. But I just slept 14 hours. So, yeah, we needed to get some content out there for you guys. Anyway, without further ado, what's going on here is that this is a little bit of a series that we're going to be doing. I'm sorry we didn't even finish the last one. I'm going back to that. We'll finish for Wealth and Trade, and then we'll get to Kings and Senators. I just want to get my notes all knocked down, and I'm probably going to redo that last episode regarding capitalism. So just letting you guys know where we're at, what's going on. But yeah, today we're going to start events and geopolitics, which is basically like eras and events in history. And some of these last for just a couple of years, like World War II is 8 to 6 years, depending on who you ask. Or if you ask the Americans, it's like 4.5. But yeah, you've got World War II, which we'll eventually be covering here in about 2 episodes. We've got the Cold War coming up, but we're going to talk about one of the major events, which is the era of globalism, and why this is so unique. So without further ado, let's get started. So I don't have a co-host, but I do have a list of questions for myself as far as little notes. So hopefully I don't get too ramble, but hopefully chat will keep me on the level. So globalism, how did it start? Well, basically it's the remnant of the Cold War, where the United States and the Soviets went head to head, and both sides had their own rules for how they wanted to win. Now, the Americans won, right? The Soviet Union collapsed. Their allies became either defectors or kind of tried to go their own way. And without further ado on that one, what really tended to happen is that regardless of whose side you were on, everyone basically had to play by the American playbook. We'll get into that here shortly. But this is how it starts. It's one superpower with global reach, global touch, and no one to even remotely challenge them. This is how we got here. So yeah, I guess that kind of rolls us into what's special about this. Well, I kind of put it in this way, just in the start, but it's largely a global rule book that is kind of thrown upon the world. Because at least back in the day, you could pick sides, right? If you didn't like the Americans, you thought the Americans were assholes to you, you could side with the Soviets. If you thought the Soviets were shitheads, you could go you could do that. And maybe you could try going your own way, but that didn't work out for a lot of people. There was a non-aligned faction, but they all had like secondary loyalties to one side or another. Like, great example, Tito's Yugoslavia was one of the leaders in the non-aligned faction, but he was an open communist. India played both sides. A few others like this. So it's just one of those deals to where some people switched sides, some people tried to get a little bit out of each side. But what really happened was back during the 80s is that the Americans just started winning and the Soviets started losing very badly. And before it was over, before anyone knew what was going on, it was over. Which is kind of impressive considering the historical context of just 10 years before it looked like the Soviets were going to win. But that's neither here nor there. We'll talk about that in the next episode, where we'll have 40 years of history crammed into one episode. It's going to be great. All right, so, yeah, this event is not exactly short by any measure, right? We're talking about 1991 to basically now. And there's going to be an argument to say that it's not quite over yet, but it will end this decade for sure. We'll get to that in the last segment. But, so what's with the global rule book? I always like to refer to this as imperialism done right. I know this pisses off a lot of my leftist friends, but the fact is that we don't have to rule you to tell you what to do. And some of this is actually very benevolent. Not necessarily all of it. The Americans still like to bomb the crap out of people they don't like. And we still are really good at, screwing people over with the IMF and a few other things that we just don't necessarily want to play with. But on the whole level here is that this is the first time that if you are any nation in the world and you want to access raw goods, raw commodities, and any kind of thing going on, is that you can. And you don't have any major trade, you don't have any major restrictions on trade. You don't have any major things that are going to keep you from being involved with the system at large. And that is the first time that we've seen this in the world. A global trade system. This is what makes this special. It is, I wouldn't call it exactly free trade. There's a few nations that are going to kite the rules. They're going to have tariffs. They're going to have subsidies domestically, China. But they're going to actually allow you to pick up a thing, transport it to another place, turn it into another good, move it to another place, turn it into a refined good, move it to another place for final assembly. This has never happened before, and it completely changed the way that the world works. Usually, everything's built in an industrial sector in-house, right? So you mine it in this area, you bring it all to this one area where you have the glass factory here, you have the steel factory here, and then you have the assembly factory here where you build the cars. That's most of the industrialized history in a nutshell. But after the Americans kind of give those global rules, and part of this is during the Cold War, is that we'll start outsourcing this to where people can be part of an integrated network. So you can mine the iron ore in Australia, you can ship it to China for smelting, then shipped over to Taiwan for refinement into a process, or well, not a processor, but you can, it's shipped to Taiwan or Japan. Japan's actually a really good one. To be built into a car frame, and then the car frame is sent over to another place to be finally assembled. Doesn't always work like that, but what I'm getting at is that's the general norm here, is that you will have all these pieces and components that are tool and dyed here, smelted here, mined here. That's new. That's really new. And the only reason why this works is because of the overhead. If you can do it cheaper and easier here, this is called comparative advantage. You all do the one thing that you know how to do really well. And maybe you can do like a couple things really, really well, but you all kind of divvy up what's going on. It works to some degree, but the problem is that we get into the reasons of why it's coming to an end. So I guess we're going to start that already. This is going to be a short episode. Sorry about that. I was hoping it would be longer. America's really good at making tractors. Yeah, it is. America's really good at making heavy machinery. Caterpillar, Case New Holland, John Deere, that kind of thing. That's still a largely an American thing. We can talk about how some of the parts come from one place to another, but yeah. America's largely do a lot of final assembly. Sorry, I just got done eating breakfast. I wasn't quite done. Anyway, so let's talk about why this ends. John Deere's a really good company to invest in. Be careful. John Deere's got a lot of public clout going after them right now. We call this, what's the word here? Right to repair is a big deal going on here in the United States, and particularly among the state legislatures, over if you can repair software. And that's not only with Apple and Apple, Samsung, that kind of thing about repairing your phones, but also John Deere's gotten a lot of trouble with this as well. And it's really pissed off the farming community. Case IH has been not Case IH, but Case New Holland has been a lot more friendly to this than them. Not necessarily saying they're better, overly better, but they seem to at least being a lot more open to the idea of having third-party people help out with some of these coders. Not necessarily exclusively. But anyway, just to kind of finish out what is very special about all of this is that this is the first time. No one has ever had global reach like this. Maybe the British Empire from long back when, but they never had the power, the clout that the Americans did. And you can kind of figure out why. The British Empire, even altogether, was like 1/8 of the world economy tops. Most of the people didn't want to be a part of their institution. It was an imperial, It was an imperial rule. Yeah, they had the Navy to police everything, but they didn't really have, and they had some rules, like a lot of people would go through the pound and through British banks to finance whatever trade if they couldn't finance it themselves. But this is a different era. It was the imperial era. Not everyone wanted to play by the same rules. So you had, the British had their own system here, the French had their own system, the Germans had their own system, the Americans had their own system. This is the first time ever where this is all in one basket. You can be in Mongolia and you can get access to dollars and you can trade to anybody. Now, Mongolia is a really radical example because they're a landlocked nation, which is kind of rare, actually. There's most nations aren't landlocked, actually. But yeah, you can be Ecuador, right? And you can build out a little port and you can access worldwide commodities, and you can be like, all right, cool, we're gonna do this thing. So you do some accounting, you figure out if you can actually participate in the system. You build a factory or like some kind of a smelting assembly or whatever works in your chain. So you build a port, you build a factory, and then you open yourself up for import and export. And you go, all right, cool. Hey, we're gonna buy this stuff from you from down here in Peru or whatever, and then we're gonna finish this into some kind of refined product, and we're gonna sell it off to somebody else, whether it be the Americans or the Europeans or anyone who's got just wealthy enough to buy it. This is kind of how the Europeans and the Japanese actually brought themselves back up to parity during the Cold War, but this became the world that we know of today with the developing world. Because now, people that weren't really even that invested in the Cold War, because of defense spending, because they were targets of war and investment from both sides, now they're all playing by the same rules and they don't have to be at each other's throats. And so we get things like the brick boom. Ironically enough, former communist powers such as China and Russia. But you also have people that really were never on the radar start building up. And this is Brazil, this is South Africa. This is India to some degree. Having all of these areas actually being able to be a part of the global system and yet not really having to go to compete on the global system except on, a dollars amount and just your overhead amount radically changed the way that we operate. And I hope I've beaten this drum a little much, so we're going to move on. But if anyone has any questions in the chat, feel free to do so. All right, so why did it end? Well, again, not necessarily it's 100% over, but it's definitely on its way out the door. First one, is basically American disinterest. The Americans are literally destroying their own rules, right? One of the biggest things that really required the Americans to actually facilitate this is free trade. You have to be able to play by equal and open trade rules. Americans have been throwing tariffs into this equation. Now, granted, some countries were already doing this beforehand, but if you're the world hegemon, and you want everyone to play by the same rules, is that you largely want to make sure that the overhead is working for everyone, which means that you don't tariff people. With that, that's actually destroying world trade. And not exactly in a quick way, but it's leveraged things in a bad way. So that was kind of strike one, if you will. And we can get that into the little bit of the Trump administration, which Biden has absolutely and happily continued. And then we can talk about what else do you need? Like to facilitate world trade, you need a massive navy. You need to be able to reach out and touch base anywhere and everywhere in the world to protect global shipping, to protect global finance and all that. And basically, whenever you have pirates running around like Somalia, or you have somebody trying to take out an oil tanker like Iran, you are going to have serious issues, and you have to stop that. And that requires global reach. That requires a massive navy that can just, largely be in the area within 72 hours. You have to be able to show presence and force, and that you are there to make sure that whenever somebody does something wrong, you can respond effectively in kind. They're no longer doing that. Not only has the Americans massively dropped the size of their navy from what used to be like a 600 boat navy to now a 300 boat navy, but they're on their way down to somewhere around 200 at the rate they're going. On the other side of that is that they've openly shown that we're not really wanting to use that much force when things go the way we don't care for. Or, if I say, we don't care for it at all. Iran has been openly seizing oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, and we have done nothing about it. We clearly seemingly don't care, and they are tankers of our allies, particularly a South Korean oil tanker was hijacked at the beginning of the year. Sure, we go around bombing Syria from now and again, but that just seems to be honestly, the thing that we're doing just for fun, and as disgusting as that may sound to you guys, is that we don't stick it anywhere anymore. In Syria, there is no point in being involved in Syria anymore. We don't have hardly any boots on the ground. We sold out half of these people to the Turks, or half of our allies to the Turks, and it seems like the only thing that we're there for is just to keep the region stabilized, which is kind of horrific, because that now means that we're playing by the same playbook as the Russians. But that actually goes to show where we're at. We're not actually here in this game for stability. We're actually here for instability, which is incredibly toxic and incredibly scary. And that is one of the big reasons why it's ending, is that the Americans no longer want to protect world trade and global finance and a system that is built upon them. They want to destroy it. They want to tear it apart. They're not here to make the world system play by the same rules. They're actually here to break it. And I'm now thoroughly convinced of this. Whether it's the Trump administration, the Biden administration, Republicans and Democrats actually agree that they don't want to run the world anymore. So yeah. Number 2 is COVID. COVID basically supercharged any kind of thing that was already going on before. Granted, the whole Trump doctrine, the America First kind of thing, definitely is more recent than it was. Then it's something that's been old, that's been stretching. But I feel like that was political inertia finally flipping sides. And what we've seen with COVID is that now everything has now gone incredibly nationalistic, whether it is American infrastructure or worldwide infrastructure. Is most people are bringing their things home, and they're trying to figure out if they can math it out and do things in a domestic way. And the truth of it is that most people can. This is a lot easier for the developed nations because they have a high standard of income, and they will actually find it to be, contrary to normal economic doctrine, more in their interest to do things at home because it provides even more jobs and targets of investment within their own domestic markets. But what on the other side of this is that comparative advantage was never actually that good of a thing. Because while it makes sense that you can, do your own things and do specialized trade, is that what it tends to do is that the number one cost in production that is seen as a liability is wages. And this is the big thing that I like to harp on. And I apologize, this is my opinion. This is not like something considered fact, and I'm actually going against the grain with most of the academic community on this one. They can eat my ass. What my opinion is this: when everyone largely does their stuff in house, or they do it with a very limited set of allies, is that most people do everything from mining to final assembly to refinement, all of this. They do the whole sweep within their system, right? Now that's incredibly expensive, right? Because you've got labor and you've got final assembly, you've got all these things that, your overhead shoot through the roof. But there's a big deal here. The number one thing that was cut down upon when we went from that old system to the new system was labor. And what this means is that, yes, your goods are cheaper at home, but your average worker no longer has the buying ability that they used to have because it was outsourced. And their jobs that they replaced them, whether you were that steel worker or that tool and die maker, is that now you're a janitor. So yeah, you got your chance to actually, have cheaper goods, but your income went down. And this is actually when probably the majority thing of what's killing the middle class. I know I've harped on this before. I'm going to continue harping on it. Now the question is, can we actually bring this back without, automating everything away? Because there's a lot of conversation about, we've actually automated like 2/3 or 3/4 or 7/8 of all these jobs. No, we outsourced most of them. Most of them were not automated. That's bad. That's really bad math. And this is why I don't trust academia anymore. Like the Chinese, the entire, the reason for the Chinese success is that they became the workshop of the world. And India's kind of had the same thing, is that you've got people that are living off of dollars a day, or even pennies a day, being the workshop of the world. You don't get this level of unemployment from automation. You get it from outsourcing. So without further ado, this is something that it doesn't work very well. And then going back to COVID is that, COVID supercharged all this because now the cost of transportation is incredibly high. You have no idea if somebody's got a shipment full of COVID crap on it. Now it looks like that most of those things don't stay on most of COVID doesn't stay on surfaces very long, or it doesn't survive that terribly long, and it's not that infectious. It largely is from person to person. However, you still have crew, whether it's shipping crew, flight crew, or transportation over land. All of these are requiring people, whether it's on train or truck, which means that there's points of contact everywhere you go. So what's the easiest way? If you are part of the system, you just wall yourself off. You do it in-house, and you keep track of your own citizenry, making sure that everyone's playing by the same rules within that system. You don't have to worry about everybody else. And that's supercharged everything that was going on beforehand. There is now more economic investment in the United States and North America than there's been since World War II. And that's part of why in the first couple months of COVID, we saw 33% of the economy go offline. It was huge. But then we saw 30% of it come back online the next quarter. The reason why is that wasn't quite what happened. A lot of people were still locked in their houses. A lot of people were still under quarantine. A lot of people were not buying goods and services. But the entire capitalist investment sector completely started retooling what they were doing. So mask production started going from China to the United States. Medical supplies, pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals have always been here. I apologize. Many things that used to be done out of country have started moving back in. And either if it's not in the United States, it's in Mexico. We have kind of made a mini global system within North America itself, and we've largely realized that, a lot of things have happened to facilitate that. We have a question. What do you think about the trade deficit that's happened over the last few months? I'm not 100% sure. I would have to look at it, meaning the surge in demand for imports mostly from East Asia. Surge, your typing is terrible, my friend. I'd have to double check this. Because most of the data that I have access to will not even be published. The end of last year is only coming out right now. So let me see if I can pull this up. Let's see where we got here. All right, that's 18. That's 20. Okay, so at least where we're at. And so what it says is that the trade deficit got even bigger during the recession. That's weird. It's really weird. That shouldn't happen. There may be some reasons for that. I'd have to look into why that is the case, because that shouldn't be happening at all. We've had more investment here in the United States than we've had in a very long time. Most of your masks are now, well, if you had masks, most of the masks were now made here. There's news articles saying that ships are not even stopping to refill in the United States and just going back to China. Well, I'll remind you that most of China has most of their economy is subsidized, so their fuel is radically cheaper. Their goods are radically cheaper. But as far as where I'm at is that for the better part of 6 months, wherever you had a major harbor system, whether we're talking the San Francisco Bay, the Port of Los Angeles, what have you, is that you had ships just sitting off, docked for ages and ages. So this doesn't make any sense to me. How the deficit's actually surged. We literally had 6 months where the better part of most goods and services that were on the water stopped moving. So, yeah, I'm a little at odds with this conversation. So I'm quite curious to see what these goods and services are. And again, the data that I get is only just being published now, and I haven't even had a chance to go through it. So anyway, getting back to where we are. COVID shut a lot of things down the way that I was talking about. Maybe I can put out a thing later talking about what was going on with these deficits. Maybe I can figure out what's going on here. If anything, hold on a minute here. I just found something. Okay. The answer what happened, what the deficit happened, is that the U.S. imports across the world actually did go down. What happened was U.S. exports pretty much collapsed. Anything that was going to the developing world or to the developed world that we were making, commercial aircraft, soybeans, automobiles, that kind of thing, we completely almost went to zero on. That's what happened. The deficit got bigger, not because we are taking in more things. It's because we were taking in less things of theirs, but even less things of ours were going out. So that would be the answer of that question. So yay, I answered it in the time. Gotta love multitasking. All right. Anyway, going back to what we were. All right. There's one final thing that I want to add on to, and that is if globalism isn't dead because of COVID alone, this is going to be the final nail in the coffin for it. The economic shrink that is already starting and coming. Dear God, you'll have to explain why you say that. All right, the economic shrink that is coming, or has already started. What happened is that a lot of Europe has been in and out of recession since 2008. Two reasons. Why? Most of their populations are old, over the age of 40. They're not the consumption base that we find usually in the developed world. They're the export base. They're the people that can build. They're the people that can build advanced goods at high productivity, but they're not people that can consume them. Because when you're 45, you don't need to buy a new car, or if you do, it's just because you can. You know, you're not part of the investment, or you're not part of the consumption system that is buying cars and houses and diapers and clothing because you're young and you're spry and you're building out a family. You've kicked the kids out of the house at 40. Well, more over in the 50s. But, when you're getting into 45, you're moving into that transition page. The kids are teenagers. They're either about to be kicked out or they are, And moving your 50s, it gets even worse. Europe is now an old folks' home. It's not quite to the point where they're all retired, but they will be here soon. And I've talked about this many, many times. Go watch the episode or in my backlog on the demographics of what's going on. I talk about this in full. But anyway, Europe is full of old people. They will largely cash out over the next 20 years in particular. And most of the developed nations that are of really high categories will cash out in the next 10. Looking at you, Canada. So yeah, that's going to hurt. So part one is that. But part two is that even with that, we have the developing world, which, because they are actually gaining in some level of economic activity, they are able to have access to the pill, birth control, things that keep population growth stable and manageable, contraceptives, birth control, abortion, all these kind of things. They've radically surged in their usage in the developing world, even though they are far more socially conservative. Apparently liberalism is a little bit more stronger than we like. I'm sorry. I'm actually... That gets into pro-choice and pro-abortion and all this other stuff, and I don't mean to get into that topic, but I'm actually a little bit more pro-life, but it looks like my side just doesn't win that fight when it comes down to it. People don't want kids. Antinatalism is very, very strong. So anyway, there's my humility moment for you. What it is that, okay, the developing world is becoming old folks' town. They just stopped having kids a while ago, or the developed world. The developing world has already got into that, where most of them are just not. And now that we're into the undeveloped world, is that most of them are now dying to COVID or diseases that were already there that have supercharged themselves. We are going to see, in some places, death on a level that we haven't seen before. And then we're going to see the average, we're going to see the average maternal rate of what used to be 5 kids across the world per mother, now dropped to 2. We're already on track to that. And that was, a lot of people thought that wasn't going to happen until about 2050, 2100. It's happening now. We're going to watch over the next 10 years the rate collapse, which I believe we're right now at like 4.5. We're going to see this drop to like 2 or 3, around 3 to 2.8 to 2.5. Just everyone across the world just isn't having kids. And that is going to bring a massive economic shrink, because what we were doing for a very long time is that with the Western developed world not having kids, we were just out exporting all of the economic growth to places that could do that, because they had 5 kids and they had massive population booms, particularly in Africa, particularly in Africa, South America, Southern Asia, that kind of thing. A lot of these places that had never been really economically touched. This is why a lot of these areas have been targets of investment during the era of globalism. It's because they could be, and they were kind of the only place to be a target of investment. That's going to not be the case anymore, because now no one is a target of investment. Number one, because of COVID. Now, number two, because they're not actually making the ends meet that they were. And that's largely a balance of economic power, right? The reason why you can take Western money, you can dump it into the developing world, is because even though, a lot of these people do not have the standard of living that you do, is that you can make up the difference for one person buying a thing with 5 people buying the thing. And that's where we're at. Going into the world that we were, is that we could just basically outsource prosperity, so that even though that they weren't all the way up the developed economic status, where they could drop, $1,000 on a fucking iPhone, pardon my language, they could drop $300 onto a Nokia, something that is like old flip phones that we used to have, right? There's a huge market for things like that. And that has built out a huge economic impetus throughout a lot of the developing world that is allowing them to participate in the ways that we would kind of find normal, or, definitely a lot more normal back 30 years ago. That's collapsing now, because they're going to have a lot more, I completely lost my train of thought. I apologize. What I'm saying is that the economic impetus is just no longer there. And so we have a thing from chat. Give me a second here. All right, so people have different priorities than having offspring, be it financial or other interest in first world countries. Globalizing the world to have the things they don't need to overproduce, or don't need to over-reproduce. So this is the conversation of... This is the conversation of, all right, cool, we have all these new people, they're becoming developed countries, and because they're becoming developed countries, we have access to automation and things that we just don't need as many people to participate in the economic the economic engine. That actually is true. That's definitely a massive thing going on. And it is one of the many causes, but also, I mean, it's part of the whole doctrine that we saw here in the United States in the developing world, or in the developed world, is that happened here. And it's largely like financial burdens, where people are like, oh, hey, when you're living on the farm, you need people to help you, grow the farm up, right? So it helps to having 5 kids, because it's free labor. And you just kind of perpetually ad nauseum that, and then if one of the kids doesn't like it, they go off to the city, right? But when you're in the city, the most of your conversation is, when you are already in the city, it doesn't make any sense to have 3 kids or 5 kids. It barely makes sense to even have 1 kid. One, because the cost of living is ridiculous within urban centers as it is. And number 2 is that you don't really need anyone to replace you. All of the farmer kids are replacing you as they come in. No, that's not necessarily what's going on here in the United States. It's actually more of an amalgamation of higher than normal birth rates for the developed world in combination with immigration is what largely what's doing this. And so I think somebody actually just put it into the conversation there. We'll get to it here in a moment. But what we've definitely seen in the United States is that we're still having population growth. We still have a higher than average birth rate. We're at 1.9, which is still pretty good. Now that numbers are being weird because of COVID. I've seen really contradictory data. I'll have to look at this whenever all the data is published. But at least for what we're seeing is that one, the Americans still have the highest birth rate of the developed world. You have immigration, which is putting everything well over replacement rate. And so basically you have all these people in the urban centers are having 1 kid or none at all, and they're being replaced by people who are just immigrating in. Or at least, somebody's extra kid, I being one of them. Yeah, so let's get back to this. just to answer chat, because we got time for the content. Do you think there will be food shortages in China because of lack of exports and the blooming population? You have got to work on your typing, my friend. I have no idea exactly what you're asking here. Food shortages in China because of a lack of exports and booming population? Okay, to answer this question, if I understand this, China's lack of exports is a concern. What they're working on is the whole Belt and Road Initiative and imperializing Africa. Is they're trying to export their system so that they're now they're the center of their economic system, to where that instead of being the developing economy in their system, they are the developed economy. And they want to use their system to export what their success was to places like Africa and Central Asia that the American system never touched that well, because they have an MMT system. And you can get away with a lot of screwery with that. China's population's not booming, though. They're actually shrinking. They are the first or second fastest aging demography in the world. In fact, they are on schedule to go into population decline in 2022, where their population will be shrinking from there on out. That may have already happened under COVID, because a lot of their data makes no sense. They claim to be one of the first nations to get control over COVID, and some of that I can actually believe, because they're an authoritarian police state. They can happily throw people into jail if they want to, or isolate them, because they don't really believe in human rights. Some of that I can buy, but some of the data that I've seen, and this is from more of like the conspiracy side of the internet, is that somewhere along the line of 30 million cell phone users just went offline there in China. And remind you that almost everyone in China needs a cell phone, because the state likes to watch you. Big Brother is there. All right, so let's get to the next comment here. Infertility is a huge problem in the USA too. All that processed food and daily exposure to various chemicals in clothing, housing materials, etc. is causing low T in males, reproductive diseases in females. Part of this I agree with, part of this I don't. Infertility throughout the developed world has been a lot. I don't believe that it's the processed foods or any of that. I think it hurts a little bit. Most of it's just birth control. A lot of these reproductive diseases, that birth control actually, it appears harms women after an extended period of time, because you're literally shutting off I want to say it's a biomechanical process, but one of your routine biological processes that everyone goes through is actively being turned off. And if you keep it turned off for a long time, it makes sense to say that it's not going to work correctly going forward. And at least from what I've seen personally, and along with some data that I've seen, is that women who have been on birth control for an extended period of time, even after getting off of it, have something on the order of a 30% drop in fertility. If you need a citation, maybe I can work on that later. It's been a while since I've read this. This was going into some of my early preliminary work that I did about a year and a half ago, 2 years. So I apologize. It's just been a while since I've read this. But some of it is chemicals. Some of it is the processed food. We're up to 60% of obesity. I've tagged on this issue very, 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 very very, very high. But low T is actually something that we're seeing across the developed world, and even in the developing world. A lot of people are not sure as to why sperm counts are dropping through the roof, or dropping through the floor as well. There's been a lot of conversations of why that is, but no one's really sure. I have a feeling that it's something that our good friends in left-wing media and left-wing academia don't want to touch, because it's against their stupid-ass ethics and values. But yeah, we'll address that at a later date. All right. Last comment I have here: the thing that will be a problem instead of reproduction overpopulation in people taking up Earth's resources, is that people are living way longer due to many factors. Part of this is true. I'm not worried about supply shortages very much. Capitalism's really good at dealing with those in a massive way, with growing resources and figuring out how to recycle more and how to get access to even more resources so everyone can participate. I'm not really too worried about that. Using a voice to talk. Yeah, mine's been a pain in the butt. But anyway, people living way longer, that's actually a problem solely out of the fact that they're living past their useful date. I did this rant a long time ago. I'm going to do it again. When Social Security got off the ground, is that it was done for when you were 65, you got Social Security. But most people, the average age that when Social Security, or the average age where somebody died when Social Security was instituted was 60. People didn't even live to the point where they could actually retire. Now they are. In fact, they're 10 years past that. Some places over 15. That's a problem because we don't have any kind of system that is built out to handle that. It's one thing where you've got still way more workers than you have retirees, and so you can kind of kite on that. Just it's a bigger drain. But most of the developed world isn't ready for this because now you have less kids than you have retirees, and that means that at some point you're going to hit a point where you have less workers than you have retirees. We're looking at you, Germany. You're the first to jump off the cliff, and that's in 10 years. Within 10 years, pardon me. So yeah, this is going to be a huge deal. Our social welfare systems are not built to handle this at all across the developed world, and it will be a massive problem. Going down the line. One more comment. Dude, we are going to get so rich when these boomers go. Probably not, because the average amount that a retiree has when they retire in assets is about $150,000, right? So, whenever you punch in your ticket for the last time, and you leave your job, and you plan on never working again, the average is that you have $150,000 in retirement savings of some sort, right? Whether it's in the assets in your house or what have you. That's how much you've got in your backlog. Some people have more, some people have less. The problem is that by estimate, and this is again same logic, is that on average you need $650,000 to retire. Because between all of the healthcare costs, the pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing, is that you are going to spend way more than what you actually have, and you are going to literally drain all of your resources to the point where you cannot pass on anything to your kids. Ironically, that's kind of what it is that the boomers are going to take all their wealth into it. They're going to dump it into the medical systems, whether it's the pharmaceuticals, whether it's draining all their money in the hospitals. So by the time that they die, by the time that they die after they retire, they're drained. They don't have anything to pass on. Some people will get lucky. Some people will get things if their parents die or their parents and grandparents die earlier than you expected, and some are wealthier than others. But for the most people, the boomers will actually not have anything to pass on to them. And so the the Gen Xers and the millennials that are hoping that they're going to get a nice big check from grandma and grandpa, what's actually more likely is that they're going to get a debt load. And there's a big conversation about debts being inherited because some places allow that, some places do not. Largely, a debt has to come with a physical asset. If it doesn't, it's largely forgiven or forgotten. The medical system here in the United States cannot handle that. If almost everyone here owes money and they have no collateral of any kind, you're gonna sell it all out, and the medical system's just gonna have to write it off as a loss. And they're already writing off incredible amounts of money in the medical as it is, and that's why your healthcare costs here in the United States are so high, is they've been trying to make up the difference for 30 years. So, yeah, this is not going to go well. I'm leaving all my stuff to a pet rescue. Those kids and grandkids suck. Is there any good news? That's a great question. The good news that I'm having, and this is not really related to globalism, but to finish off on this comment, is that moving forward, if you are in the developed world or the Western world, is that sooner or later the boomers are going to be dead, right? And they're not going to leave you much. But you're going to have people that need to replace them. And those people aren't just in, executive positions. They're politicians. They're part of the establishment, right? They won't be here forever. The Nancy Pelosi's, the Mitch McConnell's, the Donald Trump's, the Joe Biden's, they're all going to die at some point. And you're going to need somebody to replace them and the political infrastructure to replace them that facilitates new people coming in. And that means that we're going to literally watch one day as we go from the world that we're in now, where the boomers are the biggest voting bloc and they run everything, to where they're suddenly not. And that means that the entire economic, political, and social infrastructure in the world is going to move suddenly and quickly away from the boomers to Xers and millennials, particularly millennials. That's going to be a seismic shift. And when it happens, it's literally going to be it's literally going to just like a dam breaking. It's going to be the floodwaters. You're going to watch as the entire focus of the political and economic engine is preserving net assets and, holding on to gains already made, to suddenly trying to build out the infrastructure to have economic growth, to gain assets, and to perpetuate those assets. That is going to be massive. And this is the only hopium I really have going forward if you are in the developed world, or particularly within the United States, is that millennials are not in a position that they want to be in at all. And I don't see that changing in the next 10 years. They might be a little better, but the boomers are not giving them any chance to play the game that they have. And that's, we can talk about housing costs. We can talk about, capital gains. We can talk about all these things. It's not rigged out for somebody who's trying to enter these markets and or enter these markets or enter these fields. It's rigged out for people who are already there, who are established, who play out for that. That's going to change. And when that does, it will completely revolutionize what we think of as normal. And yeah, chat, you got it. Pelosi's 81, Waters 82, McConnell 78, Sanders 79. I thought Sanders was like 84. Anyway, without further ado, I think this is where we wrap up, and I apologize for getting a little bit off the weeds, but thank you, chat, for coming in and joining me this morning. Really appreciate that. It's been fun. We got almost 50 minutes of content out of this, so it is worth it. But yeah, thank you for joining me for a little bit of that Q&A session on the back. The next episode, whenever we do it, granted it might not be the exact next thing that we do, but when we do events in geopolitics, we'll be talking about the Cold War. We'll be talking about the thing that got us to the era of globalism, where we have the big Mac Daddy smackdown between the United States and the Soviet Union in a worldwide global contest. Going at it, and the biggest geopolitical struggle the world had ever seen. Yeah. So anyway, last I checked, Google could be wrong. Maybe I misremembered. But anyway, of course, I have been Tyberius D. This has been Geopolitics Tyberius D. I need to raid somebody. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one.